Greetings from a different location. I'm actually house sitting for some friends of mine. Well, dog sitting. They have two charming dogs that I'm hanging out with, but I'll be coming live from the kitchen of some pals today. We're going to be talking about Jain doctrines. Now, we're moving on to yet another religion, and truth be told, as the years pass, I find Jainism more and more compelling. When I was first taught about Indian religions, Jainism was just a footnote. Like, nobody would really talk about it. I mean, they would say, oh, well, they have this idea of materialist karma, and their monks are naked, and, well, you know, whatever. Buddhism and Hinduism is the important thing. But while there are only, like 6 million Jains in the world, they have been a community going strong since the time of the Buddha, if not before. So they've been a prominent religion despite being of low numbers and being a minority religion throughout the history of India. There is not an export Jainism. You don't see big Jain communities anywhere really other than India. So it's an old religion. It's a minority religion. And one of the cool things about it being a minority religion is it has this voluminous body of literature in Sanskrit and a language called Prakrit, which is almost like a vernacular Sanskrit. And in that sort of huge amount of literature, there's all these descriptions of other religions. So you want to know what the Hindus were up to at any given time, like the 4th century? Go look to see what the Jains had to say about them. What were the Buddhists up to in, 200 BCE? Look at the Jain texts. So to get an interesting viewpoint of what these religions were doing, it's often useful to look at their critics. So without further ado, on to Jain doctrine. Come on, slide, let's go. Okay, so here's a few kind of key ideas. So Jainism is the religion of the Jinnas. Jinna means something like a conqueror. So a Jinna is one who has been liberated by the path of Jainism. So Jainism, Jain, J-A-I-N, is the path of the Jinnas. Jinna, which means the conqueror or the warrior, from the Sanskrit root jit, or ji, to conquer. There were 24 what they call Tirthankaras, or Jinnas. I'll talk about what a Tirthankara is in a minute. So there are 24 Jinnas in this current sort of world age. And the last of whom is, his mortal name was Vardhamana, he who has caused great increase. But his name as sort of the founder of Jainism is called Mahavira, or that great heroic one. Jinnas, in fact, these Jinnas, these conquerors, are also called Arhats or Arihant. Arhat in Sanskrit, Arihant in Prakrit. And this is the same root that the term Arya comes from, or sort of these pure ones, the pure ones who aspire towards Jainism and are dedicated to liberation. So Mahavira is considered to be sort of like one of the great prophets of India. So you can put him up there with, I mean, you could, as far as historical figures, you would say we don't really have a great historical figure for Hinduism, but he is on par with the Buddha, or Guru Nanak for that matter. Okay, so what are some ideas in Jainism? Well, Jainism is known for materialist karma. They're also known for, which I'll talk about in just a second. They're also known for vegetarianism and ahimsa. And so let's get into that a little bit more. So Jainism is mostly known for materialist karma, vegetarianism, non-violence, non-possession, and naked monks. We'll talk about naked monks in a minute. Now, let me move my little face over here. You'll see there's Martin Luther King meeting with a bunch of Indian folks. Martin Luther King was incredibly inspired to the nonviolent resistance movement by Gandhi's use of nonviolent resistance against the British. And ultimately, Gandhi said he was inspired by Jainism. Now, what we'll see with nonviolence in Jainism is an entire lifestyle of removing harm, removing damage, and operating in a world that is about non-harm. What Gandhi and Martin Luther King were talking about more specifically was political resistance that was nonviolent. This is kind of like Jainism, but it's not a complete analog of Jainism. So they are known for, as I said, nonviolence, which is the reduction of harm in the world. Now, they are also vegetarians, but they're a distinct type of vegetarian. It's not just that they don't eat meat, it's that they boil water in order to not accidentally sort of, they had this idea that you'd boil water and you'd get rid of all the entities within the water. They had an idea of little microbes in them, and then if you drank that and digested, it would cause pain to those entities. Now, boiling the water, you would think would just kill them, but I think they had like an intriguing idea, like you get the water really hot and all like the microbes and the little beings in the water would jump out. So you wouldn't actually be harming them. But when they ate non-meat substances or vegetables, they refrained from eating root vegetables. Well, why? Because they're from under the ground? No. It's because when you pluck out a carrot or garlic or potato or an onion, which are things they don't really eat, when you do that, you kill the entire plant. They're more likely to eat okra or a tomato or any types of grains of wheat and whatnot, because you can harvest those things without killing the plant. So this idea of nonviolence is a little bit more intricate than just not smacking somebody when somebody smacks you first. Non-possession. So when it comes specifically to the monks, they don't own anything. Here you have some monks dressed in white, so the Shwetambaras, those dressed in white. We'll talk about them in a while, not today. But they wear masks over their face, white clothes, they have a broom, that's it. That's it. Now the Digambaras, those who are clad in just the directions, they're actually naked. The monks are naked. Well, the male monks are, and that's a complicated thing we'll get into as well. But the idea is that these monks don't possess anything. Now the irony here is that they have this idea of an ideal of not having a lot of possessions, but Jains as a community are profoundly wealthy, very much connected to trade and to banking. And they have been wealthy for quite a long time. So while they're a minority community, they've never been a community that's not prosperous per se. So what is this materialist notion of karma? Let me move my little face around again. So, look at all that goo. Karma is like a sticky goo that gets on your soul. And there's no way to get rid of it except by asceticism. You have to do ascetic practices in order to get rid of that karmic goo. By doing your penances and doing right actions, you're actually scraping the goo off. Whereas, and it's that goo that keeps you from realizing that you're a luminous soul that is essentially free. Now, Hindus would argue that you are bound because of a lack of wisdom, and through wisdom, you can find a freedom from karma. The Buddhists would say that, your karma is just one other part of yourself. Just don't worry, you're not even there. So these are some interventions. These are what monks are, or what Jains are known for. So let's talk about Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, and the different Tirthankaras. So Tirthankara, I'll talk about it in a minute. So Mahavira is known for being, you gotta know his name. So Maha means great, like Mahayana, great vehicle. Mahavira means like great hero. Vira, virile, heroic that we have. Or he's like, or Mahavira, like the big man. His name Vardhamana and originally meant the increaser. Now he was not exactly the founder of Jainism. Jainism was never really founded. Jainism is thought to be all present at all time. It's the essential truth. Now, Vardhamana Mahavira is just the last Jina in our world cycle. He's the most recent one that has come, and we have preserved his words. There were 23 guys before him, and they all kind of said the same thing in a different way, and the thing will be the same because it's the truth of Jainism. So what are these Tirthankaras? Now, a Tirthankara, so it's one who makes a tirtha. A tirtha is a place in a river where you can make a crossing. So some mention is the ford makers, the creators of a crossing space across the water being the cycle of samsara and worldly existence. They show the way across. To this extent, the term tirtha can also mean doctrine, religious doctrine. It can also mean religious communities or sanghas. So these Tirthankaras, and we're going to have a whole lesson on them, they all preach the Dharma. They preach this Dharma of Jainism. They had Kevala Jnana. So Kevala Jnana, which we're going to talk about a lot, is omniscience. They achieved mental omniscience where they had the soul knowledge of all things. They conquered their senses. They had the siddhis, or the perfections, or all the magic powers. They had a divine vision in which they could see everything everywhere. And they also had what's called this divya dvani. Now, Divyadvani is like this divine celestial sound. The idea is once you become enlightened, liberated, once you become a jinnah, there's a sound that comes out of your body. And gods will come, and people will come, and animals will come. It doesn't matter their languages. You'll be able to understand that truth of Jainism that is almost like a note in the air that anytime anybody hears it, they're able to ultimately translate it into exactly what that Jainism is. So they understand this doctrine that is Divyadvani. It's a handy way to teach. I wish I could do it. All right, so there are 5 auspicious events in every Tirthankara's life. And for all these Tirthankaras, there are festivals for them all around India, and they usually have festivals for the specific dates in which these things happen. So the 5 auspicious events are Garbha, sorry, I wrote Garbha, which means womb. This is the entrance into the womb of the mother. So this is the Atman or the Jiva goes into the womb of the mother. To extend to that, you have Jana, the birth. So this is when the being is born, the soon-to-be Jinnah is born into the world. At the same time, the god Indra, see, they got Indra too, will go to the tip of Mount Meru, which is supposed to be the mountain that is at the complete center of the universe and the highest spot in the universe, and he performs an Abhisheka. Abhisheka means like a royal bath or consecration. So there's a sense that while the baby is born, there's a ritual being done by the Lord of the gods, by the great heroic god Indra, in order to make sure he will be incredibly powerful. And also an Abhisheka is done when you consecrate a king. So it's as if he's consecrating a Dharma king. Then you have Tapa, or tapas. So we've heard this word before. This is when this soon-to-be Jinnah renounces his life, goes to the forest or wherever, and begins doing practice. Tapa, from the word tapas, means heat. There's also a tattoo on Adam Levine's chest that says tapas. I'm appalled. But anyway, it's like ascetic heat that's generated through doing these incredible penances is tapas. Finally, you have jnana, which is the realization of omniscience, the kevala jnana, the soul knowledge of all things. And that's also when they begin preaching. And finally, nirvana, when they die and they go to the siddhaloka. So when these jinnahs die, they die, they're gone, their bodies are gone, and then they go to this other place that's just between the edge of the heavens and non-existence. And there they exist, luminous and not acting. In this realm, there are countless perfected beings. They're just up there, not doing anything. They're not generating any more karma. They're not acting in any way. You can't really interact with them. They're just there, non-acting, existing as pure luminous being. So who is this Mahavir, our Mahavir, who is our great hero? Well, he was born in 599 BCE. And what other place than Magadha? Everything happens in Magadha. When he was born, as I said, Indra supposedly performed an Abhisheka on the top of Mount Meru. We do see that this historical Mahavir as a figure is mentioned in Rivals texts, specifically in texts of the Buddhists. They describe Mahavir. He was a contemporary of the Buddha, but we don't see that they ever met. Their lives did overlap, but they were very much into the sort of the same type of philosophical speculation. We see that he is the successor of a prior Tirthankara. This Tirthankara, the 23rd Tirthankara, was named Parshvanath. And his parents actually were probably some type of, Mahavir's parents were probably some types of proto-Jains that were dedicated and devotional toward this Parshvanath. He was known for having a powerful body, not unlike the Buddha, except with the Jinnahs, there's this idea that all the Jinnahs have these incredible bodies, and Mahavira was the smallest of them, so he was only 10.5 feet tall. So he was a big, tall dude. And he had all these divine markings that showed that he was clearly going to be a great person. And he was very powerful. And the idea is that his powerful body was needed to perform the incredible ascetic practices that would allow him to then become enlightened. So he renounces at the age of 30. And look how tall he is over here. He's a big guy. And he began doing powerful penances. One of the first things he did is he plucked out all of his hair. Now, Jains today, when they become monks, they pluck out all their hair, and it's very painful, but they pluck out every bit of their body hair, on the head, on the body, all of it. For the most part, I mean, they shave, but on the day that they actually renounce, they pluck out all their hair. It's a painful, bloody affair. It takes some time. It takes a couple hours. And it's usually somebody plucks their hair out for them. It's bloody. Supposedly Mahavir was not naked right off the bat. Some people say he was. Some people say he wasn't. Some people say that the gods so favored him that they gave him a divine cloth that just hung out all the time. But then after a couple of years, he just gave that away to somebody else and just went naked. So he wore no clothes. He had no possessions whatsoever. So at the age of, like I said, at the age of 30, he renounced. And for about 13 years, he traveled doing sort of powerful penances and meditations and whatnot. And he gained this kevalajnana, this omniscience, this knowledge of all things. So this was at his age of 43, and his body began to emit the divya dwani, this divine sound. And gods and animals and people came from all around, and they could understand his teachings. The question was, did he teach anything, or did he just stand there? People just heard it, and it just made sense. I kind of like that. I find it sort of interesting. So he traveled for years, and he established different sort of religious communities and monastic orders and whatnot. And he got people to become monks. His idea of Jainism was what they call the Five Mahavratas. Now, Mahavrata means great vows. So let's go over these. So these are sort of like the essential things that monks vow to, but lay people try to aspire to this. So ahimsa, doing no harm, trying to reduce the amount of damage you do in the world. Some Jain monks, especially the Shwetambaras, they put a mask over their face so they don't accidentally breathe in a bug when they're breathing. They sweep in front of themselves with a broom to make sure they don't accidentally step on a bug. So they're doing anything they can to reduce pain in the world. I mean, for a twofold reason. One, harm is bad. And two, it is that doing harm that creates the worst types of karmas that are further binding to one. Satya, always telling the truth. Truthfulness, not lying and not speaking carelessly. Asteya, no stealing or receiving items that are improper. It's just the idea is don't take anything that's not yours. Brahmacharya, which is sexual regulation, be that no sex whatsoever, which is what monks aspire to, or sex only within the bounds of marriage and only for procreation. And then aparigraha, which is having no possessions. The extreme of this being not even having any clothing. At the age of 72, the ripe old age, Mahavira died. So at this point, why did he die? Well, after he'd been enlightened, he'd gotten rid of all his karmas that could be gotten rid of, but there were still some that existed. Like we'll talk about this one called the Ayus karma. That's the same Ayur of Ayurveda, the life karma. Well, those karmas of his lifespan still had to be burned off. So once those burned off, boom, he was done. 72, he was out. He went up to the Siddhaloka, so up between the heavens and non-existence. He's up there with the other liberated beings, the infinite ones up there, and he's not doing anything. He's just existing in pure sort of being state. Now, the idea is you can pray to Mahavira, but he's not going to help you in any way. But they do suggest praying to Mahavira because it orients your head in the right way. The more you keep him in your head, the better for you, the more you will develop well. But he doesn't become like a deity that you can like converse with, or a siddha who you can pray to and is going to come down and help you out. So the class today is really about Jain doctrine. And one of the interesting things about Jain doctrines is it persists. So there are a few changes that you'll see in the practice of Jainism and some of the like rituals of Jainism, but the main philosophical principles are pretty much the same. There haven't been any big changes in doctrine. There aren't any turnings of the wheel like in Buddhism. And there's no big change like Advaita Vedanta versus Vedic ritualism. What you see is what you get. For the most part, Jainism has not changed a lot. They have, I wouldn't call it a simple system. What they have is they have a set system. And what you see is the theories of it just expand and expand and expand. There's no big breaks or revolutionary change. There are lots of changes as far as how monks should practice and live, but as far as what is Jainism, not a lot of changes. So one guy, this Umaswati, argued that there are 3 jewels of Jainism, which I sort of like because there's a contiguity with Buddhism, the 3 jewels of Buddhism. What were the 3 jewels? The 3 jewels of Buddhism, folks, they were the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Now look in Jainism. There are 3 jewels, these 3 ways to deliverance is right faith, and that's darshana, that's the same word for philosophy. Then you also have sort of right knowledge and right behavior. So all of these are not about devotion, but they're about getting your head straight and behaving properly. The Jainism is very much about your own individual behavior. So let's look at a few of these ideas that are key points to Jainism. So there is the possibility of omniscience. This is called Kevala Jnana, the sort of soul knowledge, or knowledge that is one-pointed, or knowledge that extends to all things, or the highest of knowledge. And in fact, one who has Kevala Jnana will be called a Kevali, one who has Kevala. So omniscience arises when an arhat, who is one who has this solid resolve for liberation for themselves and others, becomes accomplished. At the moment of enlightenment, he gains first a knowledge of sort of local stuff, things around, then feelings of others, then past lives, then knowledge of unseen things and knowledge of the God. So they see everything. Now, there's arguments in here, and we see this in discussions, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, about how people who are somewhat accomplished will start having a little bit of omniscience. So they'll get a little bit of sarvajna, a little bit of knowing everything. But they don't become kevalajna. It takes someone having full liberation to kind of, wham, be able to see it all, know it all, understand it all. In contrast with Buddhism, these Jains who have sarvajna, they have this omniscience, they know absolutely everything, the past, present, or future. The Buddha, when he got omniscience, it was like he only knew religious things. But the Jains were like, nope, that omniscience is everywhere. So along with this, they have this idea that these Tirthankaras and Mahavira saw the truth. Because they were omniscient and knew everything, if they said it was the truth, it's not like they were thinking it up. They were seeing it. So you can't challenge this argument. They say, our guy was completely omniscient and he knew everything. And he said, this is the truth. So if he knew everything and he said it was the truth, it has to be the truth. Now people could argue, well, maybe he wasn't actually omniscient. To which Jains would say, well, no, he was. We've got other people that are omniscient. Let's show them to you. And after a while, they realized they didn't. And there's this argument that after the 6th century CE, there is nobody else that's going to get enlightened. That's 6th century BCE. There's no one else. There's no one other than like immediate like disciples and whatnot who were going to get enlightened. So it's a little bit of a bummer. Don't shoot to be a jinnah. It's not going to happen. It's not even possible anymore. Mahavira was like, and a couple of his disciples were like the last people. So after that, the argument's fine. They can say, well, you'd say, he was omniscient. He told us the truth. It must be the truth. People say, well, how do you know he's omniscient? Say, well, he's dead, so we don't know. But he was omniscient. Well, are there more enlightened, omniscient people? They say, no, there aren't going to be any more. Not until the world is destroyed and recreated, as it goes. So on this, I have one story to tell you. And this is the story of the monk, of a guy who became a monk named Sudrishti, which means the one who has good vision. And in his rebirth name, he was just known as Lazy Bones. So there was this jeweler, and his name was Sudrishti. And he was like one of the best jewelers around. He was a great jinnah. The king loved him. He was fantastic. But he had this wife, and she was known for being hot to trot. She was a bawdy lady. Well, one time, because his wife had taken up with somebody, she got her lover to kill him just at the moment that he was about to ejaculate. So he ejaculates and dies, and then he becomes his own son. He's reborn, and to his wife, and he's just lazy. He just won't do anything. He's just not engaged with anything anybody wants him to do. They just start calling him Lazy Bones. The reason for this is because he remembered Jainism and he remembered his past lives. So what happens is there's this lazy guy is just hanging around, and the queen's jewelry breaks. This celestial, wonderful piece of jewelry, and it breaks. It's a necklace. And all the king's horses and all the king's men just can't get it back together again. So then comes forth this Lazy Bones and goes, chicka, 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 and he fixes it. And the king goes, holy moly, there's no way you could just do that. Who are you? And he says, well, in the past, I was Sudrishti. Now I'm this guy they call Lazy Bones. I have knowledge of the past. And the king is so amazed by this that he becomes a Jain because he realizes the truth of Jainism after he's heard about this person with the knowledge of his past lives. And Sudrishti goes off and becomes a monk. So what does this world look like, this world of Jainism? I find this really interesting. So the world and the soul are real. None of this Maya, that the world is delusionary and you are essentially Atman who's convinced himself he's not Brahman, blah, blah, blah. No, none of that. And you have a real soul. It's not an Atman, like the Buddhists say, there's nothing with it, there's no soul that can be found. And things actually happen, and they are real. So the Buddhists argue for pratitya samutpada, or dependent co-origination, that says that nothing can be separated apart. So because it's all not separated apart, you can't find any independent entity. Jainism says, oh yeah, you can find tons of independent entities, like yourself and the world and karmas and whatnot. They're independent entities. So in this sort of threefold world, it's called the Triloka, the threefold world. And in later ways, they describe it as being looking like a man. The world looks like a man. And, you know, you have the feet to the waist, and then you have the belly, and that's where we are, feet to the waist. That's where, that's the hell realms. And then above the body, that's that's the sort of, we call it like the heavenly realms. And then the head would be what we call the curved space. And in that curved space, that's the Siddhaloka, where the disembodied souls live. So, here's another diagram. It's a little easier to see. You can see the world is very small in the center. And then here is the heavenly realm. There's the curved place where the Siddhas live, and there are all the different hell realms. So, as I said, the threefold world consists of the heavens, the earthly realms, and the hell realms. So this world is not created by God. There's no creator God here. And there's an infinite number of versions of it in the future and an infinite number of versions of it in the past. As we notice, the hell realms are vast. The heaven realms are pretty darn big too. And then there's this tiny little spot in the center, and that's the earthly realm. That's where we live, and that's called the karma bhumi. So the idea is that if you're born in the heavenly realms as a god, it's because of your karmas there. If you're born in the hell realms, because you know you suck as a human being, it's because of your actions here. So the karma bhumi, this place where we live, which is the only place you can get liberation as well, is a really important place. Yes. Now the idea of a hell realm birth, it's fine. It's just temporary. You're just gonna be miserable for a couple thousand years, then you'll be reborn as a human again. And if you're born in the heavens, that's great. You're a god. Life is good. Life is happy. You're not gonna get liberation. Your best bet is to hope you get reborn in the human realm. And then we have an idea of an infinite space outside of this world that they call aloka, the not world, and all that's out there that they describe is just vast, swift winds. That's it. So then the Siddhaloka is right on the top, where the disembodied, sort of enlightened souls live, but they're even there, not in the aloka, in that empty place out there. I don't know what's in that empty place. I mean, probably Buddhism is out in that place. So in the world, so I just described the world, but let's talk about sort of the fundamental entities that are in the person. What makes up a person? Well, we have the jiva, which is the soul. Remember, the soul is sort of essentially luminous. They are infinite in number. They're very real. Now, they're constantly modified because they have a will. So it's a pure consciousness, but that pure consciousness has a will. And because of your will, you interact with stuff, and that causes, you know, all of the karmas and all the stuff around the soul to kind of change and move. But the soul itself is not changing. Okay, so the way we can know what the soul is the soul is essentially identical to knowledge. If you understand what knowledge is, you can understand what the soul is. Now, when we talk about these other entities, the parts that are not the soul, that are part of the person, these are a little confusing. Granted, I want to march through them, but they're confusing. So you have things that move, or dharma. Yeah, there's a different word for the term dharma. And then you have adharma, things that are not moving. Now remember that we had the gunas. We had the three gunas in Sankhya. We had rajas, tamas, and sattvas. So sattvas is purity, tamas is torpitude, rajas is movement. Think of it like this. These, you want to think when they talk about essential entities that they're actually like nouns, but they're more like verbal qualities. So you have things that are moving, things that are not moving. Then you have Pudgala. These are just like atoms. So these are non-spiritual stuff that are part of you. Like your body is a Pudgala. Your breath is a Pudgala. And then you have Akasha, so the space. But space is not negative. Akasha is not negative. It's Akasha is a positive space. It's like the inside of a pot in which rice is boiled. Akasha, so space. Now, there are 9 elements of which those essential qualities are part of. Again, these are kind of confusing. So, excuse me. So these things are sort of things that involve the soul, but again, are not the soul. And we can see that the first four of the elements, Dharma, Adharma, Pudgala, and Akasha, Dharma, moving things, Adharma, non-moving, Pudgala, atoms, and Akasha, space. Then we have these 5 other elements that have a lot to do with karma and how karma operates. So you have Ashrava. So this is the flowing of good and bad karma. Now, Sru is the Sanskrit root, which just means like the flow of things, the movement of things. So this is the flowing, like the capacity within you of karma coming in and out all the time. Well, not in and out, but on and off. For the most part, on. Most of it is just being piled onto you, just more and more muddy, gloppy goo of karma. Then you have Bandha, which means the blocks, the bindings, the karmic bindings. This is the way the karma is bound to you and affects you and binds you in directions and pushes you in others. Then you have Samvara. Now here we're looking at like elements that are leading towards impossible liberation states. Samvara is warding off the karmic inflow. So part of you and part of the essence that is not your soul is this thing that pushes away karma. So this idea would be like you restrain the mind and then you don't connect with these karmas and don't let them get on. Finally, you have Nirjara, destroying the karma, using good actions to scrape that goo off your body. Get it off of there. And finally, moksha, or liberation. When you've got them all off, then you have the possibility of being free. But you don't, not in this era. It's all theoretical. Because in this era, it's too degenerate. Nobody's getting enlightened at this point. Now, so we talked a lot about karma. And karma is one of the big sort of things in Jainism. And what we have is this materialist karma. So karma is real and it is materialist. It is a sticky goo that covers the soul. Karma prevents the individual from both realizing the soul and seeing the soul. The true self, the true jiva, is pure and it's luminous. It's pure light. Again, don't think of these things as karmas, as actions. It's stuff. Like we usually think of karmic tendencies or karmic trajectories or karmic acts. It's stuff. It's the grubby stuff on this guy's face here. And all you can see is the grubby stuff, so you don't see the soul in underneath it. So karmas themselves, once again, it's Jainism, so we have lots of categories, can be divided into 2 types. You have harming and non-harming. So harming karmas are the ones that cause delusions, the ones that kind of screw with you, the ones that make you not see the truth. So you have the jnana, varaniya, and varaniya comes from this wonderful word vri, which means to like envelop, kind of cover up. So it hides knowledge. It's like the clouds over a moon. Then you have darshana varaniya. Now remember, darshana was the word for sort of true faith that we saw before. So this obscures perception. Darshana also means viewing or vision from the root drish. So it obscures your perfection and keeps you from sort of seeing things clearly because you have these karmas that are getting in the way. Then you have antaraya, obstacles. So the soul wants to flow in good directions, but some karmas create obstacles that keep you from moving in the right direction. Now, then there are other non-harming karmas. Now remember, all of these karmas exist and keep you bound. You have to remove the karmas to become unbound. So you have, oh, I spelled that wrong. That is Vedaniya, not Vedantiya, Vedaniya. Vedaniya, which means Vedana, we've seen this before, Vedana, which is just feeling, like observation, feeling things that are pleasant or unpleasant, feelings. You have Nama, which is who you are as an individual, your individual state, your kind of ahamkara, your ego. Then you have Ayus, or Ayur, from Ayurveda, so your life and your lifespan, which needs to burn up even in a liberated person before they die. And finally, your gotra, your clan, your family, your prestige, your social interdictions in the world. So those are the karmas. So These karmas, they dictate everything in your life, but you aren't predestined by your karmas. There's always the chance to get out, to renounce, to start scraping it off. You're not completely predestined by your karmas, because at any point you can start making changes. But if you don't make changes, you're basically your life is predetermined by the karmas that you have. All right, so rebirth. Now, rebirth in Jainism is different than Buddhism or Hinduism. Buddhism, especially with Tibetan Buddhism, has a whole bunch of discussion of these bardo states, the state between being between dying and being reborn. In Hinduism, you have a number of states that can occur, whether it's 49 days to 100 days or whatnot, between dying and being reborn. Usually the soul is all kind of wacky, and if manipulated by the proper mortuary rites, they can go to heaven, or they can go to an undifferentiated land of the ancestors where or they can become ghosts. There can be all sorts of problems. But in Jainism, it's boom, boom, die, reborn, die, reborn, die, reborn, boom. So that gets out of a lot of philosophical problems in many of these other schools. Okay, so the idea is that the jiva, or the soul, becomes sort of entangled and covered by luminous bodies and karmas that are linked to their growth body. Your karmas are connected to your body. And then when the jiva is sort of reborn and goes into the womb, all the karmas are there, but then there are also changes to the jiva based on the blood and nourishment that comes from the mother's body or from the semen that is transmitted from the father. Both of those things interact to create the person that's reborn. So the combination of mother and father and the karmas create the individual who is reborn. For this tale, and I want to go and give you another story, I want to talk about Maheshwara. So there's this merchant, and he's named Maheshwara. And once again, he's got a wife, and she is very sexy and very cool. And she's like a font of beauty for erotic glory. So he has a son, and he's got everything that he could absolutely want. So what he does is, and he's likely a Hindu here, is he thinks, I need my son to become very powerful. Because there's this idea in Indian culture that the son saves the father. The son does not just inherit from the father, but he inherits the father. He inherits all of the father's debts and problems and all of his wealth and whatnot, and sort of inherits the duty to take care of the father after the father is old, and take care of the father's soul after he dies. So what happens here is Maheshwara does a sacrifice of a buffalo, and he's sacrificing it to the dead, probably to what they would call the Pitri, the fathers. And he's doing this on behalf of his son. However, a monk comes by and says, hey, buddy, I have seen what's going on here, and these souls are not what you think they are. Now, a lot of these didactic tales are important because they show you that with an infinite amount of time, and the Buddhists say this all the time, that with an infinite amount of time, every person has been your father, your mother, and your worst enemy, and your lover. With an infinite amount of time. But the Jains take it even further. It's like everybody has been everybody at a certain time. And they like to explode that out to make everything seem ridiculous and the world to seem like a chaotic, topsy-turvy, viparita place. And so in this case, what do we read? We read in Granhoff's text that the monk says, that lover of Nagila, whom you once killed long ago, because he was the rival, is now playing happily in your lap. He died just as he released his semen into Nagila. And because he was reborn in Nagila's womb, he becomes thereby your very own son. And that buffalo with whose flesh you satisfied your deceased father was really the soul of your father, really the soul of Samudradatta. And, O wise one, there's a she-dog by the door that is eating the bones of the buffalo. Know, O wise one, that that dog is none other than your very own mother, named Bahula. Knowing through my supernatural knowledge, his limited omniscience, because he's not a complete Jain, but he's got some goods, he's got some powers, that all of these terribly strange and improper things are going on in your home, I hastened to enlighten you. So what happens is he's like, I don't know if I really buy this. And then the monk said, take that dog into the other room. takes the dog into the other room. The dog digs around and finds his mother's hidden jewels, proving that all of this was true, that all of these soul entanglements are true. And from that, he renounces his own beliefs in sacrifice to help the dead and his son, and realizes that no son can help him, only his own pure behavior can, and he becomes a righteous Jain king. Now we have another story. And on this one, I'm going to read a long passage from page 416. So pause the video, pull out your Religions of India book, and look to Phyllis Granhoff's excellent little article, Stories of Renunciation, and look to page 416, in which I will read a long passage for it when it comes up. Okay, so in this tale, there's this courtesan. So if you don't know what a courtesan is like a very fancy prostitute. They're not like prostitutes because they're supposed to be really well educated. They have property. They usually are kind of big members of society and whatnot. I could teach a whole class on courtesanship. So anyway, she has a child, as happens when you're a courtesan, and she has 2 twins, in fact. And the twins are perfect. They're perfect in every way. They're like the best children in the world. But she gets in trouble with the madame of the brothel where she works, and she can't handle it. So what she does is she takes all of her wealth and she gets a basket and she covers it in jewels and she puts the twins in it and she gives them 2 signet rings with their name, Kuberadatta and Kuberadatta. So the long A being female. And the name means something like gift of Kubera. Kubera is the god of the yakshas and also the Hindu god of wealth, just to be known. So she sets this basket full of jewels and children in a river, and it floats down the river. Well, some merchants find it, and they're like, wow, this is great. Let's take all this loot, split it up. I'll take the boy, you take the girl, whatever. Let's do this thing. They go off and they raise their children very well, and in time, the children end up getting married to one another. Yipes. So they look at each other, they get this weird feeling, but, you know, they're married and whatnot. In time, they become restless and kind of confused. And at one point, the man, Kuberadatta, pulls out his signet ring to show something to his wife. And she says, oh my goodness. And she pulls out her signet ring. And they go, oh my goodness, we're brother and sister. So that's a problem. So what happens is Kuberadatta, the dude, goes off and becomes a merchant. And Kuberadatta, the girl, becomes a nun. Now, Kuberadatta, the merchant, the man wanders off and actually takes up with a courtesan named Kubarasena, his mother. She's still beautiful and incredible. He's taken up with her and they're very happy together. He's her client, she's his courtesan. They have a child. They have a child who's a boy. And all right. So what happens is Kuberadatta, the gal, she has some omniscience and whatnot. So she knows that something's going on. So she wanders to Magadha and she kind of goes out and she's looking around. She sees the sun. She's like, oh man. And she went to Kubarasena and the mother, and knowing that it was her mother, she kind of weaseled her way in and got her to put her up, give her some lodging, some alms and whatnot. So what happens is Kuberadatta, the nun, turns to the child that she sees around and says, and I'll quote, I'm going to read here, starts on 416. A little bit of tea for me. Child, you are my brother-in-law, for you are the brother of my husband, and our mother is the same woman, and so you are also my brother. My husband begot you, and so that makes you also my child. Remember, they didn't get a divorce. But your father, for you are the brother of my husband. My husband begot you, and so that makes you also my child. But your father is the child of my rival in love, and that would make you my grandson. You are the brother of my mother's husband, which makes you my uncle, and you are my brother's child, which makes you my nephew. Your mother is my mother, who bore us both in the womb, and that woman is also the mother of my mother's lover, which makes her my grandmother. She is the wife of a young man who was born from my co-wife, which makes her also my daughter-in-law. And she is the mother of my husband, which makes her my mother-in-law as well. She is the wife of my brother, which makes her my sister-in-law. And she is the wife of my husband, and so is my co-wife. And so, for your father, who is the lover of my mother, I guess that makes him my father too. You are my uncle, and he is your father. And an uncle's father is your grandfather. So he is my grandfather as well. My mother and his mother are the same woman, and so he is my brother. He is the husband of the woman who bore my husband, and so he's my father-in-law too. He took my hand in marriage, and so he became my husband in addition to all of this. And he is the son of my co-wife, and so is my son as well. The incestuousness of it all. There's actually a funny song from when I was growing up by a guy named Ray Stevens, who I find a little disappointing in his later musical output, but I quite like the song, I'm My Own Grandpa. You can look it up on YouTube. Ray Stevens, I'm My Own Grandpa. This passage always reminds me of that. So what happens is, Kubera Datta, the dude who's a merchant, is like, what is going on? And his sister, the nun, looks out and says, here's the ring. And he goes, what? And then he thinks about it all through, realizes who Kubera Sena is, and then realizes just the madness of the world. So eventually he leaves, he renounces, and is known for being a great and well-accomplished monk. We assume that his sister stays a pretty darn good nun. As to the son, I'm not sure. And then Kubera Sena, his mother, who's a courtesan, becomes a pious Jain householder. So what is it with all these stories? These stories, and there are tons of them, and they're all about how, like, your lover is your enemy, and that you accidentally sacrificed your mother, the soul that was once your mother, and a sacrifice. All of this is to show, and there's always tons of incest stuff. It's all to show that the world is crazy. And if you want to be happy in any way, you have to leave the world. You cannot live in this world. The longer you're in the world, the more madness you're just going to be a part of. And the more madness you're a part of, the more karmas you build up, the more bound you are, and the longer you stay stuck in this cycle. The only way out is to leave the world and begin doing the practices that will remove the karmic goo from your body. And when you leave the world, you will generate less and less karma. Living as a monk, you won't just be piling up karmas as you would living as a householder, having children, engaging in business deals and warfare and whatnot. And what is all of this to the end of? It's the end of deliverance. The point is to get out of it all, even though you can't get out of it all, because the last person that could get out of it all was a while ago. And in this era, there's no way to get out of it. I find that satisfying. It just takes the pressure off you. So anyway, what is enlightenment? So enlightenment here, I'm going to argue, is sort of this dawning of accomplishment. It's different from moksha. Moksha happens at death. Pure liberation is all the karmas are done. And that last one, ayus, your life wins are finally done, are burned up, and then you're gone. So an enlightened person, I would say, is a Tirthanka or a Kevalin, one who has the omniscientness to one level or another, and they continue to exist. Now, what's their point? Well, they demonstrate the power of Jainism by their very existence. They act until the ayus burns off. They don't generate any new karma, and they're around. Mahavira did that for like 40 years. He just hung around, as did a lot of Tirthankaras. And during that time, they can also give teachings. So they can look to the liberation of others. All right, so the idea here is that there are infinite liberated and infinite unliberated jivas, souls. This messes with me a bit. Like, I can get infinite unliberated ones, but it seems like if liberation is so rare, that there ought to be a fixed number. But you got to think about Jains. And Jains are very practical in their kind of wacky thinking about the world. So if they're going to be infinite souls and you have infinite time, then you should have basically infinite amount liberated and infinite unliberated. Infinity flexes in these very directions. So while it would seem there's a small amount, in an infinite space, it's a large amount. So there's a large amount, an infinite amount of liberated and infinite amount of unliberated souls. In the meanwhile, while enlightenment isn't possible, or complete liberation isn't possible in this world, there are saints, there are powerful monks, there are powerful beings, and they have some of the jhana powers, and they're worthy of revering, listening to their teachings, maybe even appealing to them. Look at this naked guy over here. He hasn't shaved in a bit. And I have been thinking about this. These Digambara monks, they often do have mustaches and beards, even though they're hairless and naked. What to do? All right, so how cool is this religion? It's so different than the ideology of Hinduism and Buddhism we've seen this far. It's a really small religion, and it persists to this day. Buddhism is gone in India, But Jainism is still all over the place. People talk about Jainism all the time, even though there aren't that many of them. They challenged everybody, and they're still there. Why are they still there? I think it's a combination of having very good scripture and having a long tradition within Jainism of monks who are great preachers and great scholars. And I think it also has to do with the Jains were very smart and connected to different clans, royal clans and trade clans that supported them, and they cultivated that in a better way than Buddhists did. This is something we'll talk about more. And then there's the fact that, especially coming into the modern period, they were very wise in connecting to banking and connecting to sort of almost like high-end trade. Then, of course, there's the thing that all their adherents are people who don't believe in spending a lot of money or living lavishly or whatnot. There's no sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but they do consider it a good thing to get money. And the one place where you'll see Jains that are just tremendously gaudy and sort of ostentatious in their use of money is when they sponsor someone renouncing. When someone becomes a monk, their whole families will literally shower them with diamonds and feed thousands of people, have parades down the street of Bombay. It's astounding what goes on. All right, so that was the beginning of Jainism, and I will catch you on the flip side.